Allahi barakatuh. I'd like to welcome everyone to the continuing lecturing series of Zaytuna College's Fall Lecture Series of 2017. Tonight we have a distinguished guest, Dr. William Barylo, who will speak about film and photography in the area of social change. I'd like to welcome all of our guests that are joining us on the live stream. We thank you for your continued support. Dr. William Barylo holds a PhD in sociology and is an award-winning photographer and filmmaker. His research focuses on how traditions and spiritualities challenge and redefine dominant social and cultural norms. He is the founder of Light Inc., a charity working on social change through visual arts. He directed the feature documentary Polish Muslims: An Unexpected Meeting, and is the author of Young Muslim Changemakers. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Dr. William Barylo.
Can everyone hear me? This is good. So, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, dear friends, Alaikum, good evening. So I would like to, first of all, thank you all for sparing your precious time for attending this humble presentation, and everyone involved in the organizing this event. So I'll be sharing with you and a few insights, and would like to discuss more broadly the issue of change, because especially in our troubled times, we often ask ourselves the questions like, how is it possible to make a difference? Especially if we're just part of a small organization, just a group of friends, how is it possible, even though being in a little structure, being able to make a difference? So we'll see about a bit more about this. But first, I would like to share with you some more details on the background of my research, which has been, I would say, I think like now 7 years of research among small grassroots Muslim charities in France, where I was born, in Poland, where my parents are from, and eventually in the UK, where I'm now settled. And so I'm talking about very small, informal, local groups of young people, most of them are female-led, who have realized that the world undergoes a global and total crisis, which is political, social, economic, environmental, spiritual, and many more. And as a response, they have decided to bring some local solutions to these social issues in the form of soup kitchens, workshops, campaigns, support to deprived students, or setting up alternative media, and they're working in open systems, meaning that it's not just Muslims working for Muslims, but they're working with everyone for everyone, with local stakeholders and with volunteers of all faiths and known. So before we get started, I just wanted to ask you quick 2 questions. First of all, how many among you have been volunteering for a charity? Can you raise your hands? That's good. And how many among you are familiar with the concept of post-colonialism? Raise your hands. Yeah, cool, perfect. So for this presentation, I would start by this very simple question. Is there such a thing like a post-colonial era? Because only a few decades ago, empires have fallen, but some researchers argue that from an occupation of lands, we have entered a time of an occupation of the minds, and especially when people are not forced but strongly encouraged to adopt some dominant norms in order to fit. This is something that Professor Hussein Boulan has called metacolonialism. I will talk about this a bit later. But with this in mind, I would like to share with you how some very small, discrete initiatives can make a big difference in reference to this. And I'm thinking especially of one of my case studies, which is in the UK, a very small space called Rumi's Cave, and how a small and discrete place like this, a community can play such a fundamental role in the history of decolonial struggles. And just before that, so we'll explore like very quickly all the impacts, implication of this concept of metacolonialism. So, first of all, I think it's nothing new to say that Muslims in the West were facing a war on two fronts. So first is the state level and everyday Islamophobia, but then there is also all this set of social norms, meaning that if you like to have a job, have friends, or even feel that you fit in the society, you will be more successful if you happen to be fair-skinned, if you don't have a beard, if you don't wear the hijab, and if your name sounds like Mo or Riz rather than Muhammad or Rizvan. And so, but the problem is to fit into these dominant norms. It requires people to sacrifice parts of their identity, their religion, their culture. And this is what Hussein Boulan has called in his 2015 article, Metacolonialism. When people are not forced to adopt the norms, but are strongly encouraged by all the structure in the society. And in my book, Young Muslim Changemakers, I focus on one of the most pervasive forms of colonization, which is neoliberalism. In a nutshell, so neoliberalism, if you open any book, it's a doctrine which says that market exchange is an ethic and a guide for all human action. To be successful, even just to survive in a neoliberal society, you better be materially wealthy, financially performant, and run after all these words you may have heard in the corporate sector. You need to be performant, you need to be successful, you need to be competitive, you need to be productive. So if you see things like, for example, the Forbes 30 under 30, you maybe have this feeling that, oh, if I'm not on this list, or if I'm not like the people in the 30 under 30, I've failed my life. So this is a bit how it works. And for neoliberalism, I illustrate how it has colonized Muslim communities in the West with 4 examples. The first one is the embrace of corporate culture, even in the non-for-profit charity sector. Maybe you have, if you have worked in these multi-million-dollar mega charities, you may have this feeling that you're working in a multinational, where people talk about performance, results, productivity. And I've attended once a training where God was compared to the CEO of a company and all the believers to his employees. So is it like we're paying in hasanat and we have to pay tax at the end of the month? I don't know. The second example is with modest fashion. We have now mainstream companies tapping into Muslims as a niche market and encouraging people to consume fashion at any cost, even if it means to sacrifice endangered species or factory workers in Bangladesh. So the question is, how Islamic is modest fashion? The question is open. The third example is what we see on social media. If you had observed and maybe reflected on who are the most popular Muslim figures on Instagram, on YouTube, so you may have wondered, why do they all look the same? And why is it that the most popular people in the circles are all fair-skinned, slim, wealthy, hyper-feminine, or hyper-masculine? Why is it when you, for example, you browse Instagram and you see people looking like models for L'Oreal, or even when it comes to men, why is it that all the men have to have big muscles and drive sports cars? This is an uncritical adoption of Western beauty standards, because this is something which has been promoted by culture and also the corporate way of being. And the fourth example is maybe giving us some clues about this. It's the selfie culture in the charity sector, but not any kind of selfies. I'm talking about selfies people take with African children in the background without asking their names, without asking their authorization. But where it comes from? It comes from here you have this culture among white middle-class people to be like this voluntarist state of mind, traveling far away to Africa and just to add some lines on the CV saying, oh, I have volunteered for such and such, and at the same time posting pictures like showing, oh, look at me, I am saving Africa. But it's nothing new. If we open our history books, who were the first one behaving like this? Colonial officers. So do you see where I'm getting? Why is it that Muslims, as an oppressed community in the West, have come to replicate the systems of domination and oppression? How Islamic it is to consume at any cost, sacrifice lives, sacrifice identities, cultures, and more. So, neoliberalism is this narrative that if you want to be free, if you want to be happy, then you have to reach the top. But of course, there's a trick, because if you want to reach the top, it means that you have to sacrifice at the same time parts of yourself, your identity, your values, your religion, your culture, except if it can be turned into a product. And it is this words we can hear sometimes even from our parents that you need to attend these prestigious schools, you need to work for these prestigious companies. But do we even know that prestigious comes from the Latin praestigium, which means illusion? So this is an illustration how neoliberalism works. And the thing is, people are unaware of the consequences it has, because this is something people see it works in the mainstream. So why should we not benefit from it? But people do not measure the consequences, and on a I would say, lower scale, people are unfortunately affected. We observe dramatic consequences in mental health issues, because when we see all these standards on Instagram, this is something most people can never achieve. And this is in addition to Islamophobia, meaning that we have the neoliberalism and Islamophobia work in a very similar way, actually, because it's all about producing and exploiting vulnerability. On the one end, Islamophobes say, go home, but what neoliberalism says is, buy this, buy that, behave like this, look like that, and maybe you'll be accepted, but we know it's all illusory, it's an illusion. And because it is the dominant thing, we do not necessarily have in the distance to reflect on this. And I've heard people saying, for example, oh, yes, we need a Muslim Mark Zuckerberg, we need a Muslim Rupert Murdoch, we need a Muslim Richard Branson. But to what point? Do we also want a Muslim Donald Trump? And why are we only taking as role models white males as in the business sector? Why not teachers? Why not artists? Why not activists? People who are community leaders? Why not women? Why not black Muslims? There are many people we can have as role models, but we only focus on what is seen in the mainstream. However, bring some balance into that. There are some places where it's fine not to fit the norm. And one of these places is probably Rumi's Cave in London. So Rumi's Cave what is Rumi's Cave exactly? Is it a religious space? Is it a community hub? I'm not even sure myself. But if you look at the walls of Rumi's Cave, in this space, which is not bigger than maybe like 2 bedrooms, it's very, very small. It's in northwest London. So people have written the definition of Rumi's Cave, and they say it's a non-defined social space. And this is, I believe, remarkable, because in a society that wants to label everything and put everyone in boxes, Rumi's Cave has no clear definition. And this is an act of rebellion. But concretely, what can people do in Rumi's Cave? So the space was set up in 2011 by Sheikh Ahmed Babakir, like famous British scholar, and he wanted a place which is different from home, different from the mosque, different from work or university, and different from the shisha cafe. So it served first as a charity shop, then an internet cafe, but later, eventually, all the successive managers of the cave have shaped it in its final form. So if you go to Rumi's cave, of course, you can pray, you can attend the Friday khutbah, you can even share meals during iftar for Ramadan, but people can also attend talks on social issues of philosophy, from hipsters to theories of Carl Gustav Jung, and the room is always packed. And at the same time, people can also attend workshops, whether it is about traditional Arabic calligraphy, or even filmmaking, photography, herbal medicine, and much more. And every month, there is an open mic at the cave, where everyone is welcome on stage to perform music, storytelling, poetry, songs, and much more. And I remember some evenings where at the cave, they're doing partnerships with local organizations. So once there were like Rastafari coming with their drums performing at the cave, you have some Sikh musicians playing like these traditional Indian instruments like sitar and many more. And so it is by definition a space for conviviality. So, and all the people gravitating around Rumi's cave have realized that, yes, the dominant norms I was talking about, like neoliberalism, it is something colonial somehow, and something also which has to do with the way the society becomes more and more modern. There is this French philosopher, Alain Touraine, he described modernity very simply. It is a culture of division. It's like in biology, for example, you have to separate what is vegetal, what is mineral, what is animal. And when it comes to social or political modernity, it is also about separating the individual from the society and from the environment. So it creates more and more individualism, and it weakens social bonds. And they have realized that it is necessarily through the celebration of Islamic ethics and diasporic culture to bring a bit more of humanity in this society seen as less and less humane. So I was talking about how these dominant norms, and especially neoliberalism, is a form of colonization. And now, how does Rumi's cave is a decolonial space by essence? By the celebration first of spirituality and religion, it is resisting secularism. By its collective dimension, it is resisting individualism. Here people are not like colleagues. All the volunteers are not colleagues or just CVs. They are literally brothers and sisters sharing times, meals, and space together. If you have volunteered in these mega charities, you would appreciate the difference, not being considered as a CV, but a proper human being. By their celebration of diasporic culture, they're resisting conformity, and by they emphasize on all these values you cannot put numbers on, such as love, gift, friendship, compassion, forgiveness, patience. They're resisting this corporate culture and the neoliberal culture which wants to put a figure on every single thing. So they perceive the human being as the opposite of a machine that earns, produces, and consumes. They are an empathetic community. They are witnessing that the society is breaking people. It is producing destruction. And we have lots of issues because of all these things I was mentioning in the beginning, especially when it comes to mental health, marriage and relationships, divorce. Systems are not working. We need to find an alternative. And this is why you would hear in the talks, or even during the Friday khutbahs, things about the protection of the environment, mental health issues, inclusivity, creativity, and many more. And especially because Rumi's cave is a space which has become dedicated to creativity. It is something which is very powerful because it produces optimism. If you want metacolonialism, it works when it makes people, because it makes people feel pessimistic. It makes people feel there is no other way. Like, this is why what we see, like neoliberalism, it makes people feel that, yes, to be happy, the only way is to consume, to buy, put figures on everything. Everything which cannot be numbered has no value. Kindness doesn't bring any money. Compassion doesn't bring any money. So let's leave this out. But they're being optimistic in the sense that even though the society divides and destructs, they still produce things. And like Javeria here, my wife just summed it really, really well when I was rehearsing, and he told me, it wins, metacolonialism wins when you cannot love yourself, when you cannot imagine a hopeful future. And then, by essence, because Rumi's cave is this space for the celebration of the difference, culture, religion, spirituality, and the creative process through arts. Like they have been exhibiting different artists, like you can see here on the screen. It brings optimism, and because it brings optimism, it is a radical act of revolution. So this is showing you like how through very small actions, like bringing just a new space, allowing people to express themselves, and also providing services to the community, whether it is by organizing talks, workshops, and every Sunday they do soup kitchen to the homeless. They are making a huge difference. They are not interested in fame or results. They're interested of working for a common good. So if you see their Facebook page, they don't have much followers, but still, if you look on a grassroots level, all the neighborhood, everyone knows Rumi's cave. We have Muslims, non-Muslims giving food for the soup kitchen, participating, coming to Rumi's cave because they know it creates what we call in sociology social capital, something which is also called thick trust. It's organic relationships with people, face-to-face interactions, while we are living in times of what I would say very thin trust. It is when you trust people you have never met or never seen just because you have seen things on the media. For example, we are voting for people we have never met in real life, and we only heard bits on Facebook. We are buying things from brands we have never really questioned their ethics or the methods of fabrication and conception of their products, but still we buy them because we are surrounded by billboards, adverts, and we see everyone buying these things, so we do not question. But if we look closely at our very small organization, they are really bringing alternatives, even when we talk about things like democracy. When it comes to decision-making, for example, they're using this very simple thing, how to make decisions through consensus and consultation, something we know as shura. And it works because this is something which in sociology we call primary democracy. So it's the same thing I was explaining. It's based on face-to-face interactions. You follow the person you trust because you know them, you have been talking to them. It's very organic. While here, so in Europe we had the Brexit, we have the rise of the far right. Here Donald Trump happened. Something sounds off. But then again, this is something we have been warned about a very long time ago. In the 18th century, you have this French guy called Alexis de Tocqueville. He went to the US and back to France, and he wrote this book, Democracy in America. And he warned us about the dangers of what he called the dictatorship of the majority. What if, he asked this very simple question, what if a misinformed majority takes decisions which are contrary to the common good? And let's see, but these very small groups, the grassroots, I'm not even talking about Muslim, but generally have been producing these kind of alternatives, but still governments, authorities will never look at them because they call us monsters. But do they know what monster really mean? The monster comes from the Latin monstrum, which means to warn, to enlighten, to inspire. In Latin mythology, the monstrum was a sign of the gods. So maybe because we are holding the mirror to the dominant norms, to the system, like exposing the flaws and the limits, although we have the solutions, they will never look. but this is maybe something open to discussion. And I'll leave it here. And just before we open the floor, for anyone who wants to have a deeper look on my works, you can find this in this book, Young Muslim Changemakers. And I'll leave it here. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Barylo. That was an excellent presentation. I really appreciated the work. I'm going to look into your book. It's something that that I've taken very personally here at the college. By the way, my name is Dawood Yasin. I'm the Director of Student Life at Zaytuna College. I forgot to mention that in the beginning. So normally after the presentations during the Fall Lecture Series, we ask people to come forward and to present questions here on the microphone. You can take a line here. We also take questions that are brought from the online platform as well too. So we ask Dr. Barylo to please come back to the stage now, and he will take questions both asked here on the microphone and also from the online platform. Thank you, Dr. Barylo. So my question is, with regard to the reference that you used for your case study, which is Rumi Cave, how do you feel that it separates itself or it's different from other programs that we have seen, for example, here in Berkeley, with just over here, the Westminster House, that was a voice during the civil rights and during anti-war, the Vietnam protests, and other similar youth organizations that were started in this way. You used the term, we have the solution, so I'd like you, if you could just elaborate on that a bit more. One, how you feel that Rumi perhaps is similar but different, and at the same time, when you talked about solutions, is something that you feel can be offered which hasn't been offered prior.
Yeah. So, I guess initiatives like Rumi's Cave can be very, very similar to some of the initiatives I've personally observed here, whether you may be familiar with the Talif Collective, or even, you know, at your local MSA, like NG, who's here, was to the MSA at USC, and they're just providing like amazing work on the ground, like blood giving day, beach cleaning sessions, and this kind of things. So I guess what is very important is their focus on things on a very small scale. They're local, and they're doing this locally with local people. It doesn't get really big, and I think this is the power of these organizations, because I feel that when organizations tend to expand, so first, even if the means might seem they may have more resources, financial resources, material networks, whatever. The problem is also it increases the inertia of the organizations, the more bureaucracy, and it makes things more difficult. For example, I remember I've been doing observation with one very big charity in France for doing soup kitchens. And I compared to smaller organizations. And for volunteering with the big one, you had to hand over your CV. While with the smaller one, you could just like come, you know, they're doing soup kitchens every Saturday, Friday, and Wednesday. You just come, they give you a high visibility vest, the gloves, and then you get started. So I think that the power resides on their ability to connect people very organically. And one case study that comes in mind was one of these very small organizations in France called Amatullah. And how did they curb Islamophobia while being very, very small? So they were founded in 2006 in the banlieue of Paris, so this urban, peripheral, and deprived area. And it was in 2006, so the authorities, when the charity was founded, they were really scared. Oh my God, the Muslims are coming. Are they terrorists? Are they trying to convert us? But then 6 years on, when I did my interviews of the civil servants and the authorities, they have completely shifted their position. and completely supporting the charity, offering them venues, publicity, premises. And the reason was that because, well, maybe it's specific to France, but because the volunteers had a regular face-to-face dialogue with the civil servants in the city council. So at the end, the city council realized that no, Muslims are not this abstract and threatening entity. And this is why they have tied really strong bonds, I would say, bonds of friendship with the volunteers. So, yeah, does it answer your question?
If I could present a question from online. So, Imran Khan asks, what are the quick wins and easier enablers to catalyze seismic change?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the end. To canalize?
He said, what are the quick wins and easier enablers to catalyze seismic change?
To canalize change. I'm not sure there are particular elements, because in the wide array of charities I've observed, it starts from literally nothing. It starts from an observation when there's something going not that well in the neighborhood, whether it is homelessness, whether it's people at university realizing that some students need support, whether it is challenging what is said in mainstream media by setting up an alternative blog or a YouTube channel. So it usually starts from a simple observation of what's wrong and what is it possible to do with the little means we have. So I remember I was talking about this charity, Amatullah, and it was a bunch of 5 young women who wanted to have witnessed that there was homelessness in their neighborhood, and they just started to cook food at home and hand over to the homeless before the charity grew a bit bigger. But everything started very, very small. People starting now it's easy with to build up a website, a blog, or just make some YouTube videos. It's possible with our phones, and people are really able to share their message on a broader scale and make things which bring a huge difference, even if it doesn't seem really big. It doesn't, maybe even if people don't collect lots of likes on Facebook, maybe if it changes maybe 1 or 2 persons, for them it's a win.
Asalaamu Alaikum. Thank you for your enlightening talk. I'm a big fan of your research. My question is, so alhamdulillah, when I was in Southern California, I felt very supported by the Muslim community there. I was able to do a lot of on-the-ground work and kind of build community the way I wanted to be part of it, right? But when coming up here to San Francisco for graduate school, I don't know if it's because I was too busy to reach out or look for resources or to find the community that I was looking for, but my question is, now I'm trying to build the community that I want to be a part of. So what recommendations do you want to offer? What suggestions do you have for students who are basically starting from nothing or very limited resources to engaging with one another and building that solid trust that you mentioned in your talk? Thank you.
Thank you, Angie. Well, this is indeed not easy task at all, because building networks is something which can be very random. There is no magical recipe for building networks, creating friendships, unfortunately. And I remember this not easy time in my life when I just moved out from France, where I felt a huge support from the community, had lots of friends, and I moved to the UK, and I was in this situation where, although I was working in a Muslim charity and I had Muslim friends in Britain, I had a very hard time because the first Ramadan I spent in the UK, I was completely alone. No one invited me. And I felt very strange because this is not how things happen in France. If people know that you're Muslim, you'll be forcefully invited for iftar, and this was not happening in London. So I don't know why. Is it because people are just busy, they have other priorities? Is it something specific to London? I still don't know, but I was like, I didn't lose hope and kept on searching a space which I could find people who with whom I could spend some time, like a community. And it took me maybe 1.5 years before I found people at Rumi's cave who were like sharing, many were sharing the same concerns as me and wanting to find a space where they could find there's like people and be together, because unfortunately what happens is that in the UK we may have like huge mosques, but they're only like serving for an utilitarian reason. People just go there, do their prayers, go back home, and it's very difficult to create bonds at this mosque. And so I guess, and this is something we cannot control, who do we meet in life, and it can be a very long journey. I think maybe I was very lucky. My journey just took like 1.5 years before making like solid friendships in London. But I know that, and also among all the people I met, some were like very responsive. We clicked like instantly, and some others it went good at the beginning, but then we like lost touch because of work, studies, or whatever. So it's very random. But I think it was also a lesson for me to learn that I really try to do my best and hold to like any good relationships I had. And well, if it develops or not, I think in the end it's God's will, because everyone is different.
Hello. Thank you very much for your talk. I had a quick question, which was, if a charity is expanding and does become larger than a small local initiative, what are the key central ethics or ways of conducting themselves do you think that they should retain if they're expanding?
Yeah, this is a very difficult question, because the problem with charity expands, it comes with a certain amount of bureaucracy. People have to control things and make sure everything follows a certain process, and it doesn't go random, because it will be out of control literally, whether it is from a PR perspective, a legal perspective. But if I think about all the charities I've observed during my fieldwork, the thing is they never grew really big. They stayed very small, but because maybe they were specific to a local neighborhood, a university, in a defined space. It was never big international charities. So to some extent, it was difficult for them even to expand, because their action was specific to their place, to a specific community. And I'm trying to search for examples of charity which started very small and has gone big that I've been studying. Well, there is now something happening at Rumi's Cave, because for surviving, because it's a very small organization, they had to make partnerships with larger charities which sponsor them. So in exchange of some visibility or organizing event in the space, so Rumi's Cave is able to pay the bills, pay the rent, and more. But now they are currently looking for a bigger space than the actual cave, so a proper building, and which a huge charity in the UK offered to rent. And so I spoke to the founders and the managers, and of course they have issues because they don't want Rumi's Cave to be appropriated by this big charity and serve their own their agenda. They want, for example, in the soup kitchen they have a no selfie policy, because No, seriously, because they have to respect. They thought that, yeah, the homeless and the volunteers are equals, and so they have their dignity, and there is no reason for like using them in the background. So, so this big charity has a complete opposite view. So they are very what's the English expression, in your face thing? No, is it that? Yeah. So they have concerns where it's going to go and how to keep the dynamics the same so people feel welcomed and safe in Rumi's cave. And so these are ongoing questions. I'm not sure that there is like definite answers for this, but one key thing is what has kept the cave together is this constant dynamic of like consultation with the volunteers, with the board members, of how things go, and like keeping things an open and dynamic conversation, and not like at some point cut where do we stop talking, where do we draw a line, and ultimately like cut themselves from the grassroots and the community, which I believe would be the biggest danger.
I have a question from online. The use of terms like social capital is still framing the discussion in material terms. What are your thoughts about changing the language usage?
Yeah, this is a very, very relevant point. Indeed, because can anything which is social, so humane by definition, be considered as a capital which is completely materialistic? And this too, I think it's part of an ongoing discussion in the social sciences, because the problem is ultimately the academia, even though people try to critically reflect on as much things as possible, the thing is people, and like we, myself too, are still biased with the dominant norms to some extent. So I think it's important to critically reflect on these terms. And actually, one theory I've been using in my research was a French theory from Alain Caillé, which is called the anti-utilitarian theory for action. Because there is this problem in the social sciences, especially I remember in the French tradition, that for understanding dynamics of action, for example, why do people get involved in politics? Why do people get involved in charities? People want and like to analyze from an utilitarian perspective, meaning that they assume that people are motivated by things such as a power, a salary, like increasing networks, so like utilitarian reasons, and people never consider things such as people can be motivated by just like a gift, by friendships, by love, generosity. So Alain Caillé in his theory argues that it is necessary to take into account all these values we cannot put numbers on, such as like love, faith, even faith, and which is difficult because there is no way of analyzing, like how can you quantify compassion, how can you quantify love? It's like literally impossible. So this is, I think, ongoing discussions, and I mean to a larger scale even I remember one of my very first struggles when I was starting my work on Muslim charities was how to talk about Islam and Muslims without using the current theories in social sciences, which are unashamedly Eurocentric. So people are using terms and concepts which are rooted in Greek and Latin etymology and only applicable to Christian beliefs and practices. So how can we talk about Islam as a religion in the Western sense? It's completely impossible. People like to make this division, like divide what is ritual, what is not, what is religious, what is mundane, and so on, which are not applicable to Islam because it is a whole complex systems of ethics, practices, beliefs, philosophy, and it's a whole way of life. So, yeah, but thanks for the person who asked the question, because this is, I think, very relevant for our times.
I have another question. The internet has had a type of leveling effect on knowledge, which I believe has contributed to a leveling of authority, which has particular side effects, when it comes to religious leadership in communities. We've seen the rise and fall of scholars and community leaders with decades of service reduced to irrelevance overnight through social media. Do you have any advice or perspectives on how we can navigate the social or antisocial media?
Well, yeah, very, very good question too. Well, I think, yeah, the thing with social media and internet is it's a form, it's a tool, so it can be used in almost every way we want, and the question is ultimately what we do with this tool. And so, in a way, I believe that there are many advantages in terms of we can access almost all the knowledge available in the world. We can access information, we can know whatever happens at the other end of the globe. And at the same time, what happens is that it is a space in which people are, I would say, able to express themselves much freely and without the boundaries as in the physical space. So on the good side, it increases people can feel more accountable for their actions because there is this kind of transparency. If there is anything bad that happens, so there can be like whistleblowers and everyone in the globe can be aware of any issue, and people can take action. On the other end, the problem is that this kind of ability of expressing themselves can also be uncontrolled, and we can witness very emotional reactions and sometimes which can be very hurtful, especially if it is not controlled, as we have seen with the fake news thing, because it is also how do we have access to all this knowledge and all this information, but there is a need of critically analyze where it comes from, what does it mean. So yeah, it's a very complex field to navigate in, and it's at the same time it's very recent because we're talking about some things that happened only 10 years ago, and things are happening increasingly quickly. So yeah, I think we are still in the process of defining what would be, I would say, an ethics of internet, of social media.
There was one more question. Just a second. Can we consider the way of the hadrimi Alawi in their dawah in Africa and South Asia, in that they were joining different non-Muslim communities in their charitable activities?
Well, to be very honest, I believe it's not something I'm very familiar with. So if I can have maybe some more precisions on the question, because I'm maybe not sure I can answer this one.
Sure, no problem. Maybe they're alluding to that this particular Dawood group, one of the things they did was, I guess, instead of taking a more insular or, conquest approach, if you will, that they were joining charitable efforts of non-Muslim charities as opposed to, I guess, taking a more insular or separate approach in terms of that impact on community building.
Okay. Do you mean insular approach to?
In other words, it seems like in terms of their approach to dawah, it wasn't just we're just going to come and impose, or just our goal is to convert you. They took a more integrationist approach in that they were joining the efforts of non-Muslim communities with their charitable activities.
I see. Well, I'm not sure how I can comment this, because this is when we're talking about dawah, I think there is no one single way of giving dawah. Some people like to make it like completely directly. We have this like huge dawah charity organizations in the UK, which are simply like a bunch of people in the street and like giving dawah directly. Some other people would do it, I would say, more subtly, whether it is by getting involved in like anything, whether it is charity, whether it's the workplace, whether it is university, and just by the behavior, giving dawah as sometimes a primary, sometimes a secondary intention. But so I'm not sure how I can comment this, because there is as many ways of giving dawah as there are people, I guess.
Please, again, join me with a warm round of applause for Dr. William Barylo. So again, in closing, from everyone at Zaytuna College, from our faculty, staff, and students, we thank you for joining us this evening. We hope that you'll continue to participate in the remaining lectures that we have for the end of the semester, and we hope to see you in a continuation of the lecture series, which will be the spring lecture series of Zaytuna. So again, we bless you. We ask you to continue your support with us in our growth together in diverse areas of knowledge and growth as a community, as was demonstrated this evening. Alhamdulillah, may Allah bless you and bless all of your affairs. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.